Trigger warning. This video discusses domestic violence.
Hi, you've reached Suzanne. Please leave me a message and I'll get back with you as soon as I can. Thank you.
It seems like a few people watching these videos are still not recognising the patterns of domestic violence. So in this episode, we're going to visit the power and control wheel as a whole and summarise why Barry fits these patterns and Suzanne doesn't. And if you still can't see it, then I suggest you seek help from a mental health professional before you yourself become an abuser. To start with, if I record through the day, you're going to hear cicadas chiming in and out. And if I record at night, you're going to hear the dog barking at everything that moves. So I apologise if either is distracting for you. On Suzanne's side of the equation, we have evidence she was engaging in an extramarital affair. Well, this is a good sign. The marriage had long since broken down and should have ended long beforehand. It is not in itself a sign of abuse, nor is it a reason to excuse abuse, hence its omission from the power and control wheel. From what we have studied so far, it appears the inability to leave the marriage seems to have played a larger role. Great, now the cat has decided to chase critters. Otherwise, on the power and control wheel, Suzanne's patterns contrast starkly to Barry's from an observational standpoint. In fact, we have found plenty of evidence that Barry's daily behaviour, not just in the final year of marriage, fits into every single section of the diagram. The point of devising such a diagram is primarily for self-assessment. You might say, well, we had an argument this week about the kids, and the week before we had an argument about finances. But maybe that's all you can find that fits your current situation. These are common recurring issues that most relationships will encounter at some stage, and encountering some common issues is not necessarily a sign of abuse. Like most diagnostic tools, even in the mental health profession, the point at which you should become concerned is when you find yourself ticking most boxes in the list, as opposed to just a few. It's also possible that you may not recognise some of the attributes listed as being consistent with your experience. So it's important to follow up your self-assessment with a visit to a professional counsellor who can more clearly identify certain attributes. In the case of Barry and Suzanne, we are not professional counsellors. All we can do is simulate a self-assessment based on what both parties have proffered and, of course, what law enforcement has thus far revealed to the public. Remember, what we have seen so far was only to convince a judge one way or another whether or not to put the case before a jury. It's neither the prosecution nor the defence's entire cache of evidence or strategy. Nonetheless, what we have found in our analysis of what evidence we do have so far is that Barry checks every single box on the power and control wheel, not just a few, the entire darn wheel. In part 1, we listened to Melinda describe Suzanne's general personality from a small child through to adulthood. And in perusing the arrest affidavit, we found not a single soul who ever knew her that described her as any kind of aggressor or manipulator. Not even a hint. Suzanne's general personality was described as aloof, which is a pacifist who tries to avoid confrontation at all costs. Not so with Barry. Investigators had no trouble at all finding witnesses who did not, by any means, describe Barry as aloof. By most accounts, Barry was described as dishonest, selfish, greedy, manipulative, and generally the sort of person you would want to avoid doing business with. One witness was indeed confronted with Barry's aggression outright very recently.
All right, so go ahead, let us know.
Okay, so I live here in Indianapolis, area in Indiana, and I was a contractor on a job it was in December of 2018. And I'm a mason contractor. It's a big commercial job. And Barry was the landscaper on this job. And I had nothing but problems with that guy. And he was basically a job bully. And the very first encounter I had with him was not pleasant. But the last encounter I had with him, he assaulted me twice. And the second time I put him in a transport hold, or basically a headlock, to stop him from attacking me and my guys.
Wow.
The police come out, no arrests were made. And then later, about 6 months later, the Boone County decided to charge us both for disorderly conduct. Now, full disclosure, I was actually running for mayor of Indianapolis at the time, and I think this was a politically based deal because this was really just a scuffle. But what I saw that day in this guy's eyes was nothing but evil. I mean, he was just so out of control. And he had been a bully to the electricians.
Wow.
And I just felt like, wow, I saw this story come across my feed this morning, and I saw that last name, and I saw Indiana, and I saw Colorado, and I knew that he had moved out there. And then when I saw what this was about, it just made my stomach turn, because, you know, I have a psychology degree from the University of Rockies, just coincidentally.
Okay.
And I'm a mason contractor. I know that's unusual, but I just I've not seen that kind of evil in somebody's eyes, but only a few times in my life.
Wow.
And when I saw this story, I just thought to myself that this is not good. So, and I know people are wanting to know more and more about this, and I don't want people to jump to conclusions. And
Right. Well, what did it seem like? How did that come about? Where you got in the scuffle there? Like, what happened?
Okay, so he was not scheduled to be on the job for 3 days. We were finishing up the very last part, the dumpster enclosure of this building, and we had our scaffold in his way, and I had my guys there taking the scaffold down, and he came around, and I was getting ready to go to another job to get some supplies, and he came around and he threw my guys' tools out in the road and verbally assaulted them just after he had verbally assaulted the electricians, and my guys came and got me. I came back, I talked to him, and he was just unruly. So I was going to get the superintendent, and he started yelling at me and came over and body bumped me. And I'm like, I just backed up, and I went to try to find the superintendent. I could not find him. I said, you know what? I'm not leaving my guys back with this guy. I'm going to go get our scaffold out of the way. We're almost done. I'm moving on. And while I was taking one of the braces off, he came and blindsided me and pushed me down. And then I got back up, and then I took care of, I stopped him and put him in a headlock and pushed him up against the wall.
Yeah, he seems like a pretty big athletic guy too. You know?
Yeah, he was bigger than me, but I protect my guys. I'm 6'3" and 200 pounds. I'm like a tall, skinny guy, but it's just one of those things where obviously it sticks in my mind because he ended up taking a diversion on this. He was in the process of moving to Colorado. Like I said, they didn't roll us up in this for 6 months. He got a notification, didn't show up, and had a warrant out for his arrest. Well, he turned himself in, signed a diversion. I was not signing this diversion. I was not guilty. I ended up, they dropped the case because they had no evidence. They had no case against me. It was political. That's a totally separate story. I don't want that to take away from.
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say that, does it seem like he's somebody that might be able to snap?
Yes. This is a typical bully situation. This was, once I stopped him, and the way I stopped him, I stopped him. I didn't punch him. I didn't do anything. I wanted to, but I did not do that. I just stopped the situation until he stopped fighting. And then he was like scared. So, but he's definitely bigger than me. There's no doubt. And, I don't know what the issue was. I still don't. That was the first and last time I ever met the man until this popped up. And wow. I'm like, and I don't think I'm going to be the only one. If you look at his rap sheet, he's been fighting with the city of Carmel and other people he sued. He just was a very confrontational person. So, that's what it's just one of the things where I still can close my eyes and picture his eyes, and just he was out of control.
Like he was enraged.
Yes, I would say like he had a demon. Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty scary. So, I know you can't, obviously you can't go, wow, well that equals the reason she's missing, but it's just sort of something that popped into your head, just like, whoa, wonder if that has something to do with it, right?
Yeah, and really, this is not the missing part. This is for if it doesn't come up that way. But at the same time, when there's a story that's in the, to put light on things, to get everything out into the light is usually how, bad things get exposed. And like I said, I don't have anything to gain from this. I had some people on Facebook, and probably the Facebook post you saw, that said I was out for self-promotion and all this, and I was a troll. And it's like, you know what? I'm just trying to help with this situation. It's tragic, but it's one of those things that has hit home with me because I was involved with this man, and I just feel like it needs to be known what's up with what we're dealing with here. And I just think there's a lot of stuff that surrounds this case that just doesn't really line up.
Yeah, well, things that are weird to me. I've said it. I don't, it's that you put a $100,000 reward in 3 days. That's just a really large amount that normal people doesn't usually do that. It usually builds up. There's also things like the police said he's cooperating, but we hope he continues to do so. That was kind of a weird little adding comment that they made there. Also, he wasn't in town, nor were any of the kids apparently, but there's really no evidence at this point that I've seen that she even went on the bike ride. There's a bike found, but how do we know that she really ever went on that bike ride? So until any of those things are filled in, we just don't really know. But what are some of the things you've noticed?
Well, what I've told about my story is all I know about him personally, but I was a cyclist here. I raced and won races. I knew a lot of people in the cycling community here, and I've asked some of my friends, and they don't seem to remember her being a rider. Now, we have all different types of riders here. So, she could have gone out on her own and ridden, but yes, who goes out on a ride on Mother's Day? And another question I have is, I don't know if you're married. I'm married, but if I'm not, around my wife on Mother's Day, I'm not going to pick that as a time to be gone.
Yeah.
So, that right there is sort of a red flag. But that's all speculation. I'm just here to tell you
Your
my
story, yeah.
version, what this is, and
Well, it's definitely
yeah,
an eye opener. It's the picture that he, in your story that he got so angry, and in the way you pictured him, he looked almost like a demon, like he was so
oh yeah,
upset.
and so it was just just like I said, my stomach turned over when I saw the last name this morning, and then when I saw who was I just had that pit in my stomach of this is not good. And I called my superintendent that was on that job, and I told him, I said, you know what, we're not going to be remembered for all the good work we've done here in Indianapolis, but we'll be remembered as the two guys that were involved in this mess. And it's nothing but a mess that this guy has caused here in my situation. It cost me a year of my life and attorneys and everything to clear a name that I shouldn't have ever been,
Yeah.
involved with.
Yeah, and you called the tip line too, just to let them know
Yeah,
that you
they
had.
did call me back. I called them early this morning as soon as I found something out, and they did call me back. The Colorado FBI called me back, and she was very interested in my take. But as properly, this is not a criminal thing yet.
Right. Yeah.
So it's still a missing persons.
It's just
But
part of the investigation.
it's part of the investigation, and let it play out. I mean, I have no ill will against this guy about anything. I almost felt like, as a psychologist, I feel like, I wanted to try to help the guy, but he would have no part of it. Because anger is just like an addiction. It is something that it just escalates, and I've seen it in people, and it's just something that I think at some point they realize they're not even doing it. So, but
Yeah.
that's sort of my story on this.
Yeah.
And I would just tell people, just let it work itself out, and we can hope and pray that we find her, and that everything turns out okay. It's just a misunderstanding. But as you know, in any missing persons case, the longer it goes, the more likely it is that there's some kind of other issue there. So,
Yeah, and it's a little bit weird that if she did just sort of get in an accident, they wouldn't have found her because everything sort of funnels down. It would have been easy for them to find her, I think, with search dogs.
well, and the other thing is they lived in a house here in Alexandria, I guess, that was sort of it was a little bit out, but it wasn't so secluded. But the picture I saw of their house, it is like a compound out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, it's
And
there's a few homes around there, but yeah, it's a $1.7 million home, sort of in the woods. Yeah, I think 7 acres they have, so that's pretty big.
yeah, so it's somebody that, that she seems like a very social person to me, from what I don't know her, but what I've seen. She has a foundation, and it just doesn't match somebody to be in isolation like that. It doesn't seem like it would be a happy fit.
I hadn't
So, I
thought of
mean, I
that.
know there's a lot of different things, and that's the psychologist in me. I like to analyze, people, and I have, and that experience in that. And 30 years of being in the construction business, I've seen them come and go. So I have a real life, you know, people judgments.
It's probably almost like being a bartender in the
It
construction.
is.
Or even and a psychologist for sure, because
Well, and it's really. I tell people, I said, well, I'm a bricklayer, but I have a master's degree in psychology. I don't know if that makes me dumb or smart. I mean, but I just enjoy that type of business, and but I also enjoy counseling people, and I wanted to have credentials to be able to be credible and being able to help people the best I can.
Yeah.
And so that's why I went back later in life to get that master's degree in psychology. But it's just troubling. I mean, you see these cases, and your heart breaks for the whole family. I mean, there's a mom missing, and there's no good. There's no happy ending to this unless she just comes back, and
Yeah.
that's the unfortunate truth.
Well, and the thing is even if she just wandered off somewhere and they find her, your story is still true. It is what it is. It's not like it's something that you know what I mean. It's still added context to the case, because right now, I mean, what you're saying adds to the story, and maybe all the pieces of the puzzle will come together, and it'll make sense even towards what the final outcome is. But it might not. Like if she literally, fell into a hole out there somewhere. Let's just say that. Well, then that means the violence that you witnessed might not have anything to do with her being in the hole, but it still was part of the story as it was being presented. So,
well, and I think that too, it's one of those things where I know that if he treated me this way, I know that there's others that he treated, because it was just a symptom of his problem. I was just a punching bag for that day.
yeah.
So, you're right. That may expose that problem. And, like I said, I would hope that people get help before they get too far down the road. I do relationship counseling, and I've seen people that, to me, the puzzling thing is you can love somebody so much to get married and have a big ceremony, and then end up hating that person more than anybody in the world. How do we get to that point? And I think part of it could be this virus that's going around. I've seen people doing crazy things, domestic violence is up. It's exposed weaknesses in a lot of areas, in health, in relationships, in business, in all sorts of things.
Yeah.
So that's just sort of, this is just one of the symptoms of people sort of losing it. So if I would say anybody that's watching this, please take a breath, maybe turn off the news for a while and just chill.
Decompress.
A lot of folks are, and this is just fueling the fire on a lot of people's emotions. I mean, I've heard from people that have, from Oregon, from all different places that are following this case. And it's like, oh my God, it just, yeah. And that's all this really is just a character, an honest character, description of what I saw here. And it was during that time when they were sort of moving out there. And honestly, I thought, who would be married to this guy? I had no idea. I'm like, whoever has to deal with this guy, I felt very, very sorry for him. I've seen those people. This guy was mad when he stepped out of the truck. Like I said, before he harassed my guys, he was harassing the electrician, kicking because they were trying to hang exterior lights, and he's trying to do his landscaping 3 days early. He wasn't even supposed to be there. The superintendent was just irritated as could be with this guy. And then he came around and got my guys. And then he came around, and then when I went to help them, he got me. So, and the first encounter I had with him, when he tried to dump a big load of mulch in front of my materials, I said, hey, I'll move myself. All you got to do is ask me. He went off then. So I had not one conversation with this man that was civil. They were all off the hook. Now, the first time I saw him, he was just being sort of jerky, just sort of yelling and like, maybe he's having a bad day. The second time, he was out of control. And even the police, when they came over to talk to me, we've already taken Mr. Happy's statement because he was determined that I needed to go to jail. I mean, he was just, honestly, I don't know why the police didn't take him that day. I just think they thought it would die down and it would go away. And it did until they brought it back up, when the assistant district attorney decided to charge us for, I think it was disorderly conduct. It was some just sort of goofy charge.
Actually, they called you back and they seemed interested, right? The FBI, right?
Yeah, they asked me if I would testify, and my attorney told me, don't talk to the police. I have nothing to hide. I have nothing to gain. I just, like I said, I'm just worried for this family. And I sort of know what they're going through because of my dealings with this guy. And no one can, maybe my foreman and my guys that were there that day saw this anger and another electrician, but it's very hard to describe the amount of rage that was there. And my professional opinion is that could this guy do something to somebody that's very hurtful? Yes. In my personal opinion, hell yes. So, yeah. I'm hoping for the best, but yeah. I'm very troubled by this.
So from this starting point in part 1, where we've established Barry as the aggressor and Suzanne as the pacifist, we also established in part 2 that the move from Indiana to Colorado ended up isolating Suzanne not just from her usual health practitioners, but also from her friends and family. We also found stories of Barry monitoring who Suzanne was in contact with, and investigators showed us evidence of him spying on her and even going so far as to stalk her and her friends. So we can confidently check off the section marked isolation. Also in part 2, we learned from Suzanne herself that Barry often dragged the children into their disputes in an attempt to turn them against their mother, which worked, by the way, since they still believe their father's an angel today. While Suzanne expressed her wishes of keeping the children out of it and often said she only stayed in the marriage for the sake of providing some stability for their youngest child. So we can check off Barry using the children as well. Again, in part 2, we learned that Barry made up relationship rules that only applied to Suzanne and did not apply to himself. He was allowed to drill her and spy on her with regard to who she was in contact with and what she was up to, but she was not allowed to drill him or spy on him. He even complained about her contacting him at work, which, when you're purposely absent to avoid your partner, is about the only option you're leaving them with. So I think we can also check off using privilege as a means to control his wife. Toward the end of part 2, we learned from Suzanne that she blamed herself, that she felt trying to stay in the marriage made her behave like someone she was not proud of being. We also saw this very dynamic play out in the Gabby Petito case, where she was made to feel as though she was the problem, which ultimately led to her murder. And then in part 3, we went into great detail regarding Barry's minimisation of Suzanne's position in the family hierarchy, and we also investigated his relentless control over their finances and the manipulative tactics he employed to not only control the finance, but to blame Suzanne when things went wrong. We also see in the arrest affidavit where Suzanne lists these matters in her list of grievances. So I think we can safely check off Barry's minimising, denying and blaming from the list, along with financial/economic abuse. On the topic of emotional abuse, we found much evidence, all discussed in the previous checkboxes, of Barry's gaslighting Suzanne in most aspects of their marriage. But in part 3, we also learned of Barry gaslighting Suzanne's family members as well, whom we learned in part 1 had been completely sold on Barry being the good guy during Suzanne's first battle with cancer. We also found evidence of spiritual abuse in Barry's own testimonies, where he claims Suzanne was an alcoholic and did drugs as a very broad brushstroke to describe her light drinking and using CBD oils to help with the discomfort caused by her cancer treatment. He also claims God was punishing her for her indiscretions with substances and extramarital affairs. Suzanne also mentions his incessant Bible bashing in her own text to Sheila. In fact, there's not a checkbox on the list that does not encompass emotional abuse, so let's check that one off while we're at it. And finally, using coercion and threat comes up numerous times in both Barry's own testimony and in Suzanne's text, as well as her list of grievances. One particularly alarming report that Suzanne noted concerned wearing a bear claw to scare her. Another suggests he also used guns to scare her. She also relays to Sheila that she fears for her life and she felt she might need a restraining order to leave the marriage. Barry himself admits to running around the house firing haphazardly at chipmunks with a firearm. He claims it was a regular practice but never elaborates on where the rest of his family might be when he executes chipmunks in this fashion. As Sheila feared, Barry admits he was indeed stockpiling money in a safe in the garage, where Suzanne claims he often intimidated her from entering. Along with threatening to hurt himself and slamming on the brakes in the car to scare her into silence, these are all classic examples of using coercion and threats, so we can check that off the list as well. In summary, as I said earlier, the point at which you should become concerned for your personal safety is when you find yourself ticking most boxes in the list. And in this case, we have found evidence to support all boxes on the list, not just most or a few, but all of them. As was the case with Gabby Petito, the offender and his defenders, as well as possibly law enforcement, have not yet put the entire picture together, as we have just done here, to properly identify the well-documented pattern of an aggressor. Whether the prosecution has further evidence to support this supposition is another question entirely. But what we have seen of the evidence so far, there's no reason I can see that any judge would not put this case in front of a jury. There's no doubt in my mind that the failure to rearrest and prosecute Barry will open the door for an eventual civil case to be launched by Suzanne's family, just as we are currently witnessing in the Gabby Petito case. In addition to presenting what I have presented here so far, I believe that Suzanne's family will have the opportunity to obtain discovery. So at the other end, I think we will all find out a whole lot more about this case, whether it's through Barry being prosecuted or the family moving forward with civil action. If you or someone you know is a victim of domestic violence, please call your national hotline. In Australia, that is 1-800-RESPECT or 1-800-737-732. In Canada and in America, you can call 1-800-799-SAFE. That is 1-800-799-7233. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Suzanne Morphew, please call the FBI tip line at 719-312-7530.